Story 1. I still can't believe I'm writing this, but I feel like I need to get it off my chest. I, 29M, found out my girlfriend, 27F, Olivia, was cheating on me. It wasn't some grand revelation in a single moment, but rather a slow-burning discovery that took weeks to fully unfold. The worst part is how I saw all the signs, but I ignored them because I didn't want to believe it was true. I met Olivia 3 years ago at a mutual friend's party. We hit it off instantly. She was outgoing, funny, and we seemed to have so much in common. Over the next few months, we spent more time together, and it didn't take long for us to become exclusive. Everything felt perfect, at first. We talked about the future early on. We both wanted the same things: a stable relationship, career growth, maybe even marriage down the line. We supported each other through ups and downs. I was always there when she needed me, whether it was helping her study for a certification exam or listening to her vent about her stressful job in marketing. For the most part, things were good. But, like many relationships, it wasn't without its little bumps. Olivia could be distant at times, and I always chalked it up to work stress or her introverted tendencies. I've never been one to doubt or second guess, so I pushed my feelings down when I noticed those tiny moments of coldness. After all, no relationship is perfect, right? It started to get weird a few months ago, but I didn't pick up on it right away. Olivia started coming home late more often. She told me she was staying late at work, or having drinks with colleagues, after a long day. The first couple of times, I didn't think anything of it. Her job was demanding, and I understood the need to unwind. But then the late nights started happening more frequently. There were weeks when she'd come home past midnight 3 times, sometimes 4. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off casually. "You know how it is, babe. Just work stuff." She said it with that smile that told me she was hoping I wouldn't dig any deeper. But my gut told me something wasn't right. I couldn't explain it, I just knew. I also started noticing small changes in her behavior. She became more secretive with her phone. She started leaving the room when her phone rang, or when she got a message, she'd lock the screen quickly. I tried not to be paranoid about it, but I couldn't ignore how odd it was. One day, she went to take a shower, and I happened to glance at her phone. There was a text from a guy named Chris, someone I had never heard her mention before. The text said, "Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll pick you up at 8. Asterisk. My heart dropped. It could have been nothing. Maybe it was a friend or a colleague. But why was she hiding it? I immediately deleted the text and tried to act like I didn't see it. I didn't want to confront her without being sure, but it lingered in my mind for days. The situation came to a head a few weeks ago, and it all happened so fast. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when Olivia's phone buzzed on the table. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen. This time, there was no hiding it. It was a message from Chris, and it read, "I can't stop thinking about you. It's crazy how good it feels to be with you. Let's make it happen tonight." Asterisk. That was it. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I felt like I was drowning, and I didn't know what to do. I picked up the phone and confronted Olivia. She froze when she saw me holding it, and I could see the fear in her eyes. She immediately went into damage control mode. "Babe, it's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. "I swear, it's just a friend. We were just joking around. You know how I get sometimes." I didn't mean for it to look like that, but I could see through her lies. The way she was acting, the way she avoided eye contact. I knew something was wrong, and this wasn't just some misunderstanding. "Who is he, Olivia?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "And why are you texting him like this behind my back?" Her face went pale, and I could tell she was trying to think of a good excuse. But she couldn't come up with one. After a long, painful silence, she finally said, "I've been seeing him for the past month. I didn't want to hurt you." The floor felt like it was falling out beneath me. I could barely process what she had just said. I wanted to scream, to cry, to say something, anything. But all I could do was stand there, in shock, holding her phone like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, but the words felt empty. It started as just a friendship, but it turned into more. "I never meant for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you," I swear. I didn't know what to say. I felt numb, like I was floating outside my own body, watching everything happen from a distance. I dropped the phone on the table and backed away. "You're really doing this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've been lying to me this whole time." Behind my back, Olivia reached out for me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. How could you do this to me?" I was confused. Things were hard between us, and Chris, he made me feel special. He listened to me when you were busy or when I felt neglected. Her voice cracked as she said it, but it didn't change anything. The pain in my chest felt like a million needles piercing my heart. I had tried to be a good boyfriend. I thought I was, but somewhere along the way, she found someone else. I was angry, so angry, but I didn't yell. I couldn't. I just stood there, feeling every ounce of my trust in her crumbling to dust. "How long?" I asked quietly. "Just a month," she said, almost pleading. "I swear, I never meant for it to get this far. I love you, I do, but, I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. "But you love him, too." She didn't answer right away. I could see the truth in her eyes, though. I could feel it in my bones. She was torn, but the damage was done. "I don't know," she said, barely above a whisper. "I thought I was just confused, but I think I've fallen for him." I couldn't stay in the apartment with her after that. I couldn't look at her without feeling like I was suffocating. I grabbed a few things, mostly just my wallet, keys, and phone, and left. She begged me to stay, but I couldn't. I needed space, I needed clarity. I spent the next few days at a friend's place, just processing everything. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about the lies, the betrayal. I wanted answers. I wanted to know why it happened. I wanted to understand what went wrong. The hardest part was that I never saw it coming. I thought I knew her, that we had something real. But in the span of a month, everything had changed. After a week of trying to clear my head, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't be with someone who had lied to me, who had betrayed my trust so completely. It didn't matter that she apologized or that she said she was confused. The truth was that she had made a choice, and that choice wasn't me. I broke up with her over the phone. I told her I couldn't be with someone who didn't respect me, and that it was over. She cried, begged me to reconsider, but I was resolute. I was done. It's been 3 months since that day, and while the pain has softened, it's still there. Every now and then, I'll catch myself thinking about her, about the good times we had, but I try not to dwell on it. I'm focusing on myself. Now, I'm going to therapy to deal with the hurt and the feelings of betrayal, and I've started working on things that make me happy again. I still have a hard time trusting people, especially women, but I'm learning. One step at a time. Story 2. I've been debating whether or not I should share this, but I'm at the point where I can't carry this weight anymore. If you've ever been stuck in the middle of a family where dysfunction runs deep, you might understand how tough it is to deal with. I'm 29 and this all centers around my sister's wedding and how it turned into a nightmare due to long-standing family dynamics, favoritism, and a betrayal that I never saw coming. It's going to be a long one, but this feels like something I need to get off my chest. To understand the situation, I need to give some context. My family isn't what you'd call normal. My parents, 57M and 55F, have always had a complicated relationship, and it trickled down to the way they treated their 3 children. My older sister, Erica, 32F, has always been the golden child. She's intelligent, driven, successful, basically, everything my parents ever wanted. I have always been the middle child, stuck between Erica's perfection and my younger brother, Evan, 25M, who's always been the rebellious one. Growing up, Erica could do no wrong. She was the one who got all the praise, all the attention, while Evan and I often felt overlooked. As the years went by, it was clear that Erica was their favorite, and I learned to accept it in a way that many people who experience favoritism within families often do. I kept my distance, worked on my own life, and tried not to let the lack of attention affect me too much. But as we all grew older, I started realizing just how much that dynamic shaped my relationship with both of my parents. Their behavior towards Erica became more and more transparent. She got away with things that I or Evan would have been scolded for. Even at family gatherings, She'd be the one who was always asked about her accomplishments, while Evan and I were almost treated as background characters. Over the years, the resentment built up, but I tried to focus on my own career and life, convinced that things would eventually change. Then came Erica's engagement. I was happy for her, I really was. I even helped her with some planning ideas, offering my suggestions for venues and giving her some tips about wedding photography, since I'm a part-time freelance photographer. When she told me she was getting married, I was initially excited to be involved. She said I'd be one of the groomsmen, and I was over the moon. But as the months passed, things started to feel off. It was subtle at first. Erica would ask me for advice or opinions, but the final decision always seemed to come down to my mom. And the closer we got to the wedding date, the more I realized I wasn't being treated like I expected to be treated. It was always, "Mom thinks this is best," or, "I think you should wear this because Mom likes it." My mom, who had always been the one calling the shots in our house, was running the show. At the same time, Erica and I started to have some small disagreements. Nothing major, just little things that seemed to irritate me more than usual. At one point, I jokingly asked if I was going to be the wedding photographer or the groomsman, considering my profession. She laughed and said, "Oh, don't worry, we've already hired someone for the photos. But you can help with the other stuff." I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but the remark stung. I felt like I was being pushed to the side in favor of other people. Then came the dress fitting. I had no idea how or why I got involved in this, but Erica asked me to come along for the dress fitting. I wasn't sure why she wanted me there, but I assumed it was because I was part of the wedding. When I arrived, it turned out I wasn't just there to observe, she wanted me to help choose between two dresses. I thought it was a bit odd, given that she was already engaged, but I agreed, hoping it would be a bonding experience. That's when it happened. While we were picking through the dresses, my mom showed up with a few of her friends. I knew something was off right away because the mood in the room shifted. My mom, who'd always made it clear how much she loved Erica, was acting like I didn't exist. She didn't even acknowledge my presence, she was too busy telling Erica how gorgeous she looked in every single dress. I didn't mind at first. I was happy that Erica was enjoying the moment. But then, I made a comment about how I liked one of the dresses, and that's when the tone completely changed. "You're not even in the wedding, why are you giving your opinion?" My mom snapped, her voice sharp. I was stunned. I hadn't realized until that moment just how much my mom's words hurt me. I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't meant to step on anyone's toes. But somehow, I felt like I was being dismissed, again. Erica didn't say anything to defend me, and it felt like my mom's words were justified. I just left the fitting, hurt and confused. I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe my mom was just stressed. A few days later, everything blew up. It was during a family dinner. My dad was sitting at the head of the table, as usual, while Erica and Evan were talking excitedly about the wedding. I was half listening, scrolling through my phone. Suddenly, Erica turned to me and said, "You're all set for your speech, right? Mom said you were doing it." I froze. "What speech?" I asked, my voice shaking. Erica laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Come on, you know. The one where you talk about how we grew up and how proud you are of me. Mom said you were writing it for months." I was dumbfounded. "Mom told you I was writing a speech?" Erica's smile faltered, and she glanced at my mom, who looked away quickly, pretending to be busy with her food. I knew then that something wasn't right. My mom had apparently planned all of this behind my back without even consulting me. She had assumed I would write a speech about my sister without giving me the choice or asking if I even wanted to do it. That was when everything hit me all at once. The years of favoritism, the constant undermining, the constant feeling of being a background character in my own family's story. I snapped. "You never asked me about any of this, Mom," I said, voice cold. "You just decided that I would do it, like I don't have any say in the matter." My mom was quiet for a moment, but then she said something that shocked me. "You don't need to make everything about you. Erica deserves the spotlight. You've always been jealous of her, and I'm tired of it." I couldn't believe my ears. I had spent my entire life trying to be a good son, trying to get my mom's approval, and all I had gotten was scorn and dismissal. Evan, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. "Mom, you really need to stop treating Matt like this. It's getting ridiculous." Erica, always the mediator, immediately jumped in. "Guys, can we please just have one peaceful dinner?" But it was too late. The tension was palpable, and I couldn't stand it any longer. I stood up, threw my napkin on the table, and walked out of the house. The next few days were tense. My mom called me multiple times, asking me to come over and apologize, but I refused. I was done pretending. I needed space. But Erica, my ever-loyal sister, kept texting me, telling me I needed to make peace with Mom because it was important for the wedding. She didn't get it. She never did. A week before the wedding, I finally got a message from my mom. She said, "If you don't come to the wedding, you're no longer part of this family. We've had enough of your childish behavior." That was the final straw. I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to the wedding. The wedding happened without me. My mom sent me a long, tearful message about how heartbroken she was, but I stood my ground. I wasn't going to be a part of a family that treated me like a second-class citizen. Erica sent me a message too, asking me to reconsider, but it wasn't the same. I knew she was caught in the middle of a broken dynamic that she'd never fully understood. 3 months later, Erica and I still don't talk as often. She and I haven't had a real conversation since the wedding. I'm not sure where we go from here, but I know one thing for sure: I'm never going to let my family treat me like that again. I've started to rebuild my life, focusing on my career and friendships that don't come with the baggage of favoritism. It's been a long road, but I'm learning to stand up for myself in ways I never could before. Story 3. I've been going back and forth on whether or not I should share this, but after everything that's happened over the past few months, I feel like I need to get this off my chest. My 29M fiancé, Jenna 27F, and I were together for 4 years before everything came crashing down. It all started when I started noticing things weren't quite right between us, but I didn't know how bad it had really gotten until the truth came out. This isn't just about the cheating, though. It's about how relationships can break down in ways you don't expect, and how trust, once broken, can never fully be repaired. Jenna and I met during college. We were both studying at the same university, but we never crossed paths until our senior year. One day, we were paired up for a project in one of our core classes, and after a few hours of working together, I was smitten. She was intelligent, funny, and genuinely kind. We exchanged numbers, started texting, and before I knew it, we were seeing each other. Things moved pretty quickly, but in a good way. We clicked immediately. We had the same sense of humor, shared similar values, and our physical chemistry was undeniable. We had a lot in common, and for the first year, it felt like I had met the one. We did everything together: cooking dinner, weekend trips, late-night talks about our future. We started talking about marriage, and after dating for 2 years, I proposed. She said yes, and we started planning our wedding. It was around the time we got engaged that I started noticing small things about Jenna's behavior that didn't quite add up. She became more secretive with her phone, something I didn't think too much about at first. She'd always had her phone on her, but she started hiding it more often. If I walked into the room and she was texting, she'd quickly lock the screen or put it away. At first, I assumed I was just being paranoid. It was a natural response when you're in the honeymoon phase of an engagement, right? So, I brushed it off. I didn't want to overthink things. But then it got worse. She started staying out later and later after work, claiming that her colleagues wanted to grab drinks or that there was a work event. I didn't think much of it initially. She had a demanding job at a marketing agency, and I knew how important her career was to her. I trusted her, and I trusted that she was telling me the truth. But deep down, I felt a growing sense of unease. It wasn't just the late nights or the hidden texts, it was the way she acted when we were together. She started becoming distant. When we went out, with friends, she was less affectionate, less interested in spending time with me. She'd be on her phone more, scrolling through social media, responding to messages, and even when we were out for dinner, she'd seem distracted, almost disengaged. The turning point came one evening when I tried to kiss her, and she turned away. "I'm tired, I'm sorry," she said, looking anywhere but at me. It wasn't like Jenna to pull away like that. She was always affectionate, always making time for me. I didn't know what to make of it, but that was the moment when the cracks in our relationship started to show. A couple of weeks after that night, I had an experience that I'll never forget. I was home one evening, and Jenna was out with her friends. She had left her phone on the kitchen counter, and I couldn't help but glance at it. I know, what I did wasn't right. But at that point, I was overwhelmed by doubts, and something told me I needed to look. I never thought I'd actually find anything, but when I opened her messages, I saw the name Mark pop up, a guy the first didn't recognize. I hesitated. I should have stopped there, but curiosity got the best of me. The messages were, well, they were everything I didn't want to find. Mark, I can't wait to see you again tonight. Asterisk. Jenna, I know, it's been so hard not seeing you every day. Asterisk. Mark, I'm counting down the hours until I can kiss you again. Asterisk. Jenna, I miss you so much. I don't want to hurt him, but I can't help how I feel. Asterisk. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It felt like I was reading a script from some terrible soap opera. But it wasn't a script. It was real. My fiancé, the woman I was supposed to marry, was cheating on me. I felt my heart race. I thought I was going to be sick. I didn't know what to do. I kept scrolling, hoping this was some kind of mistake, hoping I had misunderstood. But it was clear. Jenna had been seeing Mark for months. I was frozen. I didn't even hear her come home. She walked into the kitchen, and I quickly locked her phone. She noticed the tension in the air instantly. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice a little too calm. I couldn't even look at her. "Who's Mark?" She went pale, her eyes widening, and in that moment, I knew. She didn't even have to say anything. The guilt was written all over her face. "Matt," she whispered, almost pleading. "I can explain." But I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. I didn't yell. I didn't scream, though I wanted to. I just stood there, staring at her, feeling completely hollow. "Explain," I repeated, my voice quiet. "How do you explain this?" Jenna started to cry. "I'm so sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "I never meant for this to happen. It just did." "You've been sleeping with him," I said, my voice trembling. "You've been lying to me this whole time. For months. I never meant for it to go this far," Jenna said, her voice cracking. I was confused, and Mark was there. He was different. "You were so focused on work, and I didn't know how to talk to you about it." "You cheated on me, Jenna," I said, feeling my anger build. "You betrayed me. You lied to my face every day. How could you do this?" "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, almost begging. "I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, I do. But I also love him. I don't know what happened. I'm so sorry." I could barely process what she was saying. She was talking about loving him. But I was the one who had been there for her. I was the one who had supported her through everything. How could she betray me like this? "What now?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "What am I supposed to do now?" Jenna collapsed in tears. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know. But I'll do anything to make it right, I swear." But I knew it was too late. Nothing she could say could take away the betrayal. The trust we had spent years building, gone. And the worst part was, I had no idea when it started. How long had this been going on? How many lies had I been fed? Over the next few weeks, Jenna begged me to forgive her. She said she'd end things with Mark, that she didn't want him anymore. But I couldn't just flip a switch. The pain of betrayal doesn't disappear overnight. I needed time, but I also felt lost. My entire vision of our future had been shattered. I couldn't even look at her the same way. At the same time, I was consumed by questions. Had I missed something? Could I have been a better partner? Was there something I didn't do, something I didn't see that pushed her into someone else's arms? I became obsessed with the details. I wanted to know everything, how it started, how long it lasted, what was said. I started questioning every part of our relationship, every moment we had together. It felt like the foundation of my entire life had been ripped out from under me. After a month of agonizing over it, I came to a painful decision. I couldn't stay with someone who had betrayed me so completely. I tried, I really did. But the trust was gone. I couldn't look at her without feeling the sting of her lies. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay when it wasn't. I ended the engagement. I called off the wedding, and we broke up. Jenna was devastated. She begged me not to leave, but I knew that I couldn't stay. As much as I loved her, as much as I wanted to fix things, I knew that I could never trust her again. The months since then have been brutal. I've gone through phases of anger, sadness, and confusion. I've cried, I've yelled, and I've even thought about trying to get back together. But every time, I remind myself of what happened. It's been 6 months now. I've started dating again, though it's been hard. The scars from this betrayal will take time to heal, and I know I'm not ready to fully commit to someone else yet. But I'm learning to trust myself again. I'm learning that it's okay to walk away from something that hurts you, even if it's hard. And while I may never have the answers I want, I've learned one thing through all of this: betrayal isn't just about one mistake. It's about the lies, the deception, and the slow unraveling of trust that happens over time. Sometimes, even the strongest relationships can fall apart in the most unexpected ways. Story 4. This is probably going to be long, but I need to get this off my chest. I don't know if I'm looking for advice, validation, or just a place to vent, but I think writing it all down might help me make sense of it. Maybe you all will too. It's a lot, so buckle up. My name is Mark, 34M, and I'm the middle child of 3. My sister Leah, 38F, is the oldest, and my brother Ben, 29M, is the youngest. I was raised in a typical, loving family, or so I thought. But over the years, I've come to realize that my family's love was conditional, and the cracks in our dynamic ran much deeper than I ever imagined. This all started with a family reunion about 6 months ago. You know, the kind where everyone pretends to be normal for a day or two but things inevitably unravel after enough wine and old wounds are reopened. Yeah, that's what happened. It all blew up, and I'm still reeling from the aftermath. To understand what happened, I need to give some background on my family. Our parents, Jack, 58M, and Elaine, 55F, are what I'd call traditional. They were both very involved in our lives growing up, too involved, in hindsight. They were always there, always dictating what was best for us, and their love and approval were earned through obedience, success, and, above all, being the right kind of child. Leah, being the oldest, was always the golden child. She was the one who excelled academically, who followed all the rules, and who always seemed to know exactly how to please mom and dad. She was the model child, the one they were proud of, the one whose achievements were celebrated. They often referred to her as the smart one, or the responsible one. No one could ever live up to her standard. Then there was me. I was the middle child. I didn't get the same kind of praise that Leah got, nor did I receive the same kind of rebellion points that Ben, the baby of the family, did. I was stuck in between, quietly struggling for attention, approval, and acknowledgement. I often felt like I was the one who got the least, but was expected to take on the most. Ben, on the other hand, was the wild one. He rebelled against everything: school, authority, the concept of rules in general. He was the problem child, always in trouble, always acting out, and yet, no matter how much trouble he caused, he was still the baby. And for some reason, despite all the mistakes he made, our parents never seemed to be too hard on him. He was coddled, forgiven, and, in many ways, got away with things I never could. Now, to add more layers to this, there was a secret in our family that no one ever talked about. Something that would come to light only much later. About a year ago, my parents decided to have a big family reunion. It had been a while since we'd all gotten together. Leah was now married with 2 kids, Ben had just gotten out of rehab again, and I had been living in a different state for work, so it was nice to think about a weekend to reconnect. As soon as I got to my parents' house for the weekend, I felt it. The tension, the unspoken animosity. My parents had gone all out, preparing a huge dinner and inviting a bunch of distant relatives who were completely unaware of the cracks in our family foundation. But once we were all seated at the table, I could tell something was off. Leah was sitting at the head of the table, as usual, basking in the limelight of her perfect family. Ben was wearing his usual mask of indifference, barely speaking to anyone. And then there was me, sitting silently, observing. Mom and Dad were gushing over Leah's kids, talking about how well they were doing in school, how well-behaved they were. Ben was noticeably absent from any conversations about his life, as usual. But then, something happened that made me uncomfortable. During dinner, my parents subtly started comparing my life to Leah's again, how much more stable Leah's family was, how much better she was doing in life than me. I could feel the old sting, the sense that no matter how hard I tried, I could never measure up to her. Ben, noticing the comparison and wanting to deflect, made a few snide remarks under his breath, criticizing my parents' favoritism toward Leah. That didn't sit well with me either. For once, I agreed with Ben, but there was so much resentment packed into that comment that I didn't know how to respond. After the dinner, my parents went to bed early, and the rest of us, Ben, Leah, and I, lingered in the living room, drinking wine and talking. It was supposed to be a normal night of catching up, but Leah and Ben were at each other's throats within an hour. Leah was asking Ben why he'd failed his most recent drug test in rehab, and Ben was calling her out for being the perfect little princess, who couldn't relate to any asterisk of the problems he'd gone through. I, as usual, took the backseat and let the conversation unfold. But then, Ben dropped a bombshell. "You think you're the only one with secrets, Leah," Ben said, voice laced with bitterness. "You don't know half of what's going on around here." Leah froze, and I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you talking about, Ben?" she asked, though I could tell she was already nervous. Ben didn't answer right away. He took another swig of his drink and then said, "I know what happened between you and Dad." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned to Ben. "What do you mean?" Ben's expression darkened, and for a moment, I thought he was going to drop it. But then he said, "Oh, I think you both deserve to know. All those perfect family stories, they're full of shit. Leah and Dad had an affair. For years. And you're all too blind to see it." Everything went silent. I couldn't process what he was saying. I couldn't believe it. Leah's face turned white as a sheet, and I could see the pain in her eyes. My mind raced. Had I missed this? Had I really been that oblivious? Leah stood up, shaking her head. "That's a lie, Ben. You're just..." "No," Ben interrupted, "it's the truth. I was there. I saw it happen." My stomach dropped. I had no idea what to do. Everything in me wanted to confront our parents right there, to demand answers. But Leah, with tears welling up in her eyes, stood up and rushed out of the room. Ben and I sat in stunned silence for a moment before I turned to Ben, trying to understand what was going on. "Ben, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Why are you just telling us this now?" Ben slumped in his chair. "I've been carrying this for years, Mark. I couldn't let it eat me up anymore. It's not just what happened between Dad and Leah, it's what they did to all of us. They've been lying to you and Mom, pretending to be this perfect family. But none of it was real." The next morning was chaos. Leah didn't show up for breakfast, and my parents were oblivious to what had happened the night before. I couldn't keep quiet. I told them everything, about Ben's revelation, about the affair, about the lies. The shock on their faces was undeniable, but they didn't react the way I expected. Instead of the confrontation I anticipated, my dad immediately became defensive. "That's not true," he said, voice trembling. "That's a misunderstanding." My mom, however, was eerily quiet. She didn't deny it, but she didn't defend herself either. Her face was pale, and her eyes were distant. Leah, who had been quiet through the whole ordeal, finally spoke up. "It's true," she said softly. "I didn't want anyone to know, but it happened." The family crumbled in that moment. My father was visibly shaking, and my mom's eyes welled up with tears, but there was no apology, no remorse, only a quiet acknowledgement of the truth. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like everything I'd known about my parents was a lie. Since that day, my relationship with my family has been permanently altered. Leah, who had been the golden child, is now the one we all view with a mix of guilt and betrayal. My father has tried to justify his actions, but I can't look at him the same way anymore. And my mother, she's withdrawn, almost silent, as if she's ashamed of everything she's done. Ben and I have had a strained relationship since then. He feels like the truth was finally out in the open, but I'm not sure I can forgive him for dropping that bombshell in such a public way. It has left scars on all of us. As for me, I'm still processing everything. I'm angry at Leah, disappointed in my parents, and confused about how to move forward. The family reunion, meant to be a simple weekend of reconnecting, ended up being the catalyst for everything falling apart. Story 5. It all started with an accidental meeting. I, 34M, was sitting in a small coffee shop in the city center, trying to focus on my work, when she walked in. I hadn't planned on meeting anyone that day, but she was there, and everything about her caught my attention. She had that kind of smile that seemed to light up the room, and the way she walked with confidence but also seemed a little unsure, like she wasn't sure she belonged but carried herself as if she did, was magnetic. Her name was Sophie, 32F, and I later found out that she worked as a freelance graphic designer. We started talking about the usual, life, work, the mundane, but there was something about our conversation that felt effortless. I'd never really believed in love at first sight, but after that day, I was more than willing to entertain the idea. We began seeing each other more often, coffee dates, random walks through the city, talking late into the night about our dreams, our pasts, and the things that shaped us. Sophie was everything I thought I wanted. Smart, funny, independent, yet kind-hearted. We didn't rush into anything, we took our time. After a few months, I was sure she was the one. She made me feel like I could be myself, completely and unapologetically. As time passed, though, I started noticing things that didn't sit well with me. Small things, at first, that seemed insignificant but slowly began to add up. Sophie was always so busy with work, and while she had a tendency to get wrapped up in projects, she would also distance herself emotionally. At first, I told myself it was just the nature of her job, and I wanted to be supportive. I didn't want to come off as needy or clingy, so I kept my worries to myself. But then, there were the nights when she would come home late and smell faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe she had been out with friends, or maybe someone had hugged her and left a lingering scent. After all, she had friends, lots of them, and I trusted her. But the doubts started creeping in. There was also the issue of her ex, David. He was a constant presence in her life, and while she assured me they were just friends, I didn't like the way he would text her at odd hours or how she would get this strange look on her face whenever his name came up in conversation. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to insecurity, but the more I tried to ignore it, the more it gnawed at me. I talked to Sophie about it once. I told her how I felt uncomfortable with David still being around, but she reassured me that there was nothing to worry about. "He's just a friend," she said, her voice soft and sincere. "You're the one I'm with, and I love you." I wanted to believe her. So, I did. It wasn't until about 6 months later that I discovered the truth. I came home early from work one day, excited to surprise her with a homemade dinner. The apartment was quiet when I entered, but then I heard voices. Sophie's voice was unmistakable, but the other voice was unfamiliar, deep, familiar in a way that made my stomach churn. It was David. I don't know what prompted me to go toward the bedroom, but I did. And what I saw stopped me cold. Sophie and David were sitting on the bed, talking closely, laughing, but there was something in the way they looked at each other, a chemistry I had never seen between her and me. I don't know how long I stood there, watching, before Sophie turned to look at me, her face going pale when she saw my expression. "Mark," she whispered my name, her voice trembling. I can explain. I couldn't hear the explanation. My heart was pounding too loud in my ears. I turned and walked out without saying a word. I didn't go home that night. I spent hours walking aimlessly, trying to process what I had just seen, what it meant for everything I thought I knew about her, about us. The next morning, Sophie texted me, begging to talk. She said that nothing had happened, that it wasn't what I thought. I wanted to believe her. I really did, but the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. That night, I confronted her. "What were you doing with him?" I asked, my voice cold. Sophie looked down at the floor. "I wasn't cheating on you, Mark. But I've been emotionally distant, and I think you've noticed it. David and I have been talking about things, about my insecurities and my fears. He's been there for me in ways that you weren't, and I didn't know how to tell you." My heart shattered. The truth was worse than I had imagined. She hadn't cheated, but she had emotionally invested in someone else, someone who had been more attentive, more present than I had been. "I'm sorry, Mark," she said softly, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant to hurt you." The days that followed were a blur. We talked, argued, cried, and tried to make sense of what had happened. Sophie apologized endlessly, and part of me wanted to forgive her. But there was another part of me, one that couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, of being replaced by someone else, even if it was just emotionally. I spent a lot of time thinking, trying to figure out what I wanted. I loved her, but I didn't know if I could trust her again. It wasn't just about David, it was about how she had closed off from me, how she hadn't let me in when things got tough. And that scared me. I wasn't sure if the relationship I had with her was built on something real or just on the surface. The next few weeks were strained. Sophie tried to make it up to me in every way she could: text messages, surprise dates, even calling me when she was out with friends just to check in. But nothing felt the same. The cracks were already there, and I couldn't ignore them. Eventually, after several heart-to-hearts, we decided to take a break. We agreed that we needed time apart to figure out who we were, both as individuals and as a couple. It was hard, but I knew it was the right decision. I had to find my own footing again, to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It's been a year since that break. Sophie and I still talk occasionally, and we've both gone through a lot of personal growth. I've worked on building my confidence, setting boundaries, and learning how to communicate better. Sophie, too, has made some changes. She ended her friendship with David to respect our relationship and has been seeing a therapist to work on her emotional openness. We haven't gotten back together yet. In fact, I'm not sure if we ever will. But I've learned to look at the situation differently. It wasn't just her fault. I had a role to play, too. I wasn't as present in the relationship as I should have been, and I had my own insecurities that I wasn't dealing with. I pushed her away emotionally, and in a way, I created the space for someone else to fill. As for Sophie, she's in a new relationship now. I'm not jealous, at least not anymore. I'm happy for her because I know she's working on herself. And maybe, just maybe, we'll both find the happiness we deserve, together or apart. Story 6. I never thought anything could tear my family apart. We were, what people would consider, the perfect family. My father, Paul, 58, was a successful lawyer. My mother, Alice, 56, was a schoolteacher who had been the emotional backbone of our family. My older brother, Jake, 34, was married to his high school sweetheart, Emily, and they had 2 kids, Charlie, 6, and Mia, 4. My younger sister, Grace, 28, had just graduated college and had recently started her own consulting firm. And then there was me, Ella, 32, the middle child. I was the one who had always been the peacekeeper, the one who ensured everything was balanced. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and we often got together for Sunday dinners, those warm, hearty meals where everything was supposed to be perfect. Of course, there were the usual squabbles, sibling rivalry, disagreements about politics or sports, but nothing that couldn't be resolved with a glass of wine and a round of jokes. We had it all. We had what everyone envied. But as with most families, appearances were deceiving. Beneath the surface, there were secrets, things we never talked about, buried just deep enough that they didn't seem to matter until they did. It started with my father. Paul had always been the reliable, stoic figure in our family. He worked long hours and didn't show a lot of emotion. But a few months ago, things began to change. He became distant, withdrawn, often getting home late, and when he was around, he seemed tired, irritable. At first, I thought it was just stress, maybe the demands of his law practice had taken a toll. But my mother noticed it too. She'd ask him how his day had gone, and instead of the usual response, he would mutter something like, "It was fine," or, "I'm just exhausted." That was unusual for him. One day, my mom asked me to meet her for lunch. She had a look on her face that I couldn't quite decipher. We sat at a small cafe, the kind that was hidden away from the usual hustle and bustle. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, and I could tell she was debating how to say something. "Ella," she began, her voice shaking just a little, "I think Paul is hiding something from me." My heart sank. I hadn't even considered it. My father had always been loyal, at least, I thought so. My mother explained that there had been an increasing number of late nights at the office, and she'd noticed some discrepancies in his spending habits, extra dinners out, unexplained charges on the credit card. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the worry was growing. I reassured her that it was probably nothing, that maybe he was just stressed or dealing with something at work. But inside, I couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling. Something was off. A week later, the truth came crashing down. It was a Saturday afternoon when I overheard a conversation between my mother and my father. I had returned home early from a meeting, planning to surprise them by making dinner, but I overheard my mother's voice, shaky and upset, coming from the living room. I saw the texts, Paul. I saw them. My mom's voice cracked, and I felt my stomach churn. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the next words froze me in place. Is this how you're going to do this? My mother asked. After everything we've been through, you're just going to leave me for her? I felt my body go cold as my father responded, his voice low, almost defeated. Alice, I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. I could hardly breathe. My father, the man I had admired my whole life, was having an affair. A part of me wanted to rush in and confront him, but I was frozen in place, unable to process what I had just heard. The next few days were a blur. My mother, in shock and disbelief, couldn't bring herself to speak to him. She stayed in her room for most of the day, only coming out to care for my younger siblings, Charlie and Mia, who were too young to understand what was going on. The rest of us, the older children, were left to deal with the fallout. Jake, my older brother, was the first one to know. I texted him immediately after hearing the conversation, and he rushed over, furious. We met at our parents' house the next evening, and the confrontation was inevitable. When Jake entered the house, he stormed into the living room. What the hell is going on, Dad? He demanded. My father, pale and exhausted, looked like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't try to deny it, he didn't even try to justify it. I've been seeing someone else, Jake, my father admitted, looking at the floor, not meeting anyone's gaze. For the last year, I didn't mean for it to go this far, but I don't know how to fix it now. Jake slammed his fist on the coffee table, causing the mugs to rattle. You've been lying to us all this time. You've been lying to Mom. He turned to my mother, whose face was pale with shock, her hands trembling as she tried to keep it together. My younger sister, Grace, who had been on a video call with her boyfriend, walked into the living room, her face full of confusion and concern. What's going on? Why is everyone yelling? Grace, I said, stepping forward to shield her from the confrontation. Dad, he's been having an affair. Her face fell as the reality of the situation hit her. Grace, who had always been the peacemaker in our family, began to cry. How could he do this to Mom? How could he do this to us? The months that followed were the hardest any of us had ever faced. Our family fractured. The Sunday dinners stopped. My mother moved out of the master bedroom and slept in the guest room. I became the unofficial mediator, trying to keep some semblance of peace between my parents while trying to deal with my own feelings of betrayal. My brother Jake demanded that my father leave, but my mother insisted that they try therapy first. We've been together for 30 years, Jake, she would say. I want to at least try. But the damage was done. The trust between my parents was shattered, and my father had left a permanent scar on all of us. His affair had become the elephant in the room, and every conversation seemed to circle back to the same painful topic. I started to pull away. I couldn't look at my father the same way, and while I wanted to be there for my mother, I didn't know how to help her process her pain. The worst part was that neither of my parents seemed capable of helping the other. My father was so consumed with guilt and self-loathing, while my mother was drowning in sorrow and anger. It wasn't until a few months later that I learned more about the woman my father had been seeing. Her name was Claire, and she was one of his colleagues from the law firm. A woman who had been working closely with him for years, helping him on major cases. From what I gathered, their relationship had started innocently enough, but as they worked more closely together, something had developed. She was younger, ambitious, and, according to some of my father's friends, She had always made him feel like he was still relevant in a world where he was slowly becoming less influential. I didn't know what to do with that information. My father was apologetic, of course, but it felt hollow. It felt like everything he said was an excuse. He had spent years building a life with my mother, only to throw it all away for someone else. And as much as I hated the betrayal, I also couldn't help but feel sorry for him. He was broken. Claire was no longer in the picture, but the scars from their affair were deep. It's been almost a year since that day, the day everything in our family came crashing down. My mother and father are still living in separate spaces. They've gone through therapy, but the healing process is slow, and there are days when it feels like the past is too heavy for either of them to carry. My siblings and I are still trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality. Jake is angry, still holding onto the betrayal like it's a weapon. Grace is torn between wanting to support both parents and being angry at them both for the damage they've caused. As for me, I've come to terms with the fact that my family will never be the same again. But I've also learned something important through this whole ordeal. People can change, but it doesn't always mean they can make things right. It's a long road ahead, but we're starting to rebuild, not as the perfect family we once were, but as a family that's learning to live with its flaws. Story 7. I never thought it would happen to me. I always considered myself a good judge of character, someone who could spot a liar or a cheater from miles away. But somehow, I got sucked into the perfect illusion, a happy relationship, a solid foundation, and a future that seemed unshakable. That is, until I found out everything I thought I knew was a lie. It started 5 years ago. I, 28F, met Ryan, 31M, at a mutual friend's birthday party. We clicked instantly. He had that kind of charm that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. He was funny, thoughtful, and every conversation we had was deep and meaningful. It wasn't long before we started dating, and within a year, we were living together. Ryan was the kind of boyfriend who remembered everything. The little things, like my favorite coffee, my love for romantic movies, the way I always took my shoes off right at the door. He was attentive in a way that made me feel truly special. My friends adored him. My family thought he was the one. I did, too. We had everything going for us. We talked about the future all the time. Our plans to travel the world, buy a house, and eventually get married. Every weekend was a new adventure, hiking, cooking together, long nights on the couch with wine and Netflix. It felt like we were living in a fairy tale. I trusted him completely, and I believed he trusted me just as much. But even in the most perfect relationships, there are cracks, things you can't see at first, but are always there. It started with small things. Ryan became increasingly busy with his work. He was in marketing, and there were always late nights at the office or after-hours events he needed to attend. I didn't mind. I understood that his career was important to him. But there was a part of me that began to notice the distance growing between us. He didn't text me as often. When he came home late, he seemed distracted. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The first real sign came one Friday evening, about a year into our relationship. I had stayed home to finish a project, and Ryan had gone out with his colleagues for drinks to celebrate a big campaign launch. I wasn't too surprised when he texted me around midnight saying he'd be home soon. That wasn't unusual. He often worked late, and sometimes he'd grab drinks after. What caught me off guard was the text I received an hour later. It was a simple message. "Hey, I'm staying over at Jason's place tonight. I'll see you tomorrow." My stomach dropped. Ryan had never done that before. He always came home, no matter how late. I called him immediately, but he didn't pick up. I texted him again, asking if everything was okay, and got no response. I stayed up waiting for him, but he never came home that night. The next day, when he finally returned, he acted completely normal, as if nothing had happened. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he had a bit too much to drink. Maybe he didn't want to wake me up at 3 a.m. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. But the doubt started to creep in. Why wouldn't he just tell me where he was going? Why didn't he answer his phone? I didn't say anything about it the next day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Over the next few weeks, his behavior continued to be odd. He became more distant, less communicative. We had fewer deep conversations. I began to feel like I was losing him, even though he never outright said anything that would make me think we were in trouble. But it wasn't until a month later that I found the evidence I couldn't ignore. I was cleaning up the living room one Saturday afternoon when I found an unfamiliar piece of paper on the coffee table. It was a receipt from a hotel. It wasn't from a place we'd ever been together. The receipt had his name on it, along with the name of a woman. My heart raced as I stared at the paper. The hotel was a fancy boutique one I knew he couldn't afford on his own without cutting back on something. I tried to keep calm, but the anxiety was overwhelming. I waited for him to come home, pacing the apartment, trying to gather my thoughts. When he walked in, he immediately noticed something was off. He put his bag down and gave me a confused look. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice sounding defensive already. I didn't waste any time. "What's this?" I held up the receipt. He froze for a second, his face going pale. "Ella, it's not what you think," he said, his voice tense. "It's a work trip." Who is she?" I cut him off. "Who is this woman?" Ryan's face turned red, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "I can explain," he said, taking a step toward me. "But you have to listen to me first." I threw the receipt on the table. "Don't. Just don't. I'm done listening to your excuses. I've had enough of this." Ryan sank onto the couch, his face buried in his hands. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." "What do you mean, it just did?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "You've been seeing someone else behind my back, and you expect me to just accept it? You didn't mean for it to happen." "That's not an excuse." Ryan was silent for a long time, and I could see him trying to find the words. "Her name is Sarah," he finally said, almost in a whisper. "She's someone I met at a conference. We got close, and one night, he paused, his voice thick with shame. "We slept together. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you." My mind was reeling. I could barely process his words, let alone the fact that everything I thought I knew about our relationship was a lie. How could he do this to me? How could he betray me like this? For the next few days, I was a mess. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. Ryan begged me to forgive him, but I couldn't even look at him. I kept hearing the words he'd said, how he'd betrayed me with someone else, someone who had no place in our lives. He tried to explain it as some kind of momentary lapse, but I couldn't accept that. What did that say about me? That I wasn't enough for him. That he had to find someone else to fulfill his needs. I left the apartment for a while to stay with a friend. I didn't want to be around him. I needed space to think and figure out what the hell to do next. When I came back, I was still angry, still hurt, but I knew I needed to make a decision. We had been living together for so long, was this relationship worth salvaging? For the next couple of weeks, we went through the motions. Ryan apologized constantly, saying he would do anything to fix it. But I was still numb. I couldn't feel the love I once had for him. Every time he touched me, I felt disgusted. Every time he looked at me with those pleading eyes, I felt rage bubbling up inside me. He had crossed a line I could never uncross. It wasn't until I found out that Ryan had been texting Sarah, even after our confrontation, that I finally knew what I had to do. He was still holding on to her, even though he swore he wanted to make things right with me. I had given him an ultimatum: either cut ties with her and prove you can be faithful, or we're done. When I saw the text messages, I realized that it was never about us. It was about his inability to be honest with himself, let alone me. He was still holding on to the idea of Sarah, still seeking the validation and attention he had from someone else. I confronted him one final time. "You don't get it, Ryan," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I can't do this. I can't be with someone who doesn't value me, who can't even keep their promises. You don't love me, you love the idea of me." Ryan pleaded, but I knew in my heart it was over. I packed my things that night, leaving behind the life I had built with him. It hurt more than anything I had ever experienced. But in that moment, I realized that I deserved more. I deserved someone who would never treat me like an option.